Right, we've all got it. Lovely. Okay, so good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this session called Great Minds Think Alike. And it's a phrase I'm sure you've all heard before. We often use it in a congratulatory way, don't we? You know, when somebody does or says something that somebody else was also going to do or say. And we think of it generally in a positive way, but is it a positive? And is it desirable in the context of scrutiny? Or should we be actively encouraging diverse views and perspectives, valuing the difference and creating the environment where difference and diversity is celebrated and encouraged? And today we're going to cover all of those elements. But before we go on to any of that, let us please introduce ourselves. So, Karen and I, as you can see, I'm not sure if those photographs actually you recognize who we are, but anyway, I'm Lucy Malarkey, and Karen, smiling with her headphones on there, waving, is Karen Faulkner, and we're the directors of an organisation called Positive About Inclusion. We're a social enterprise, and we deliver bespoke support and advice and training services to help organisations on their inclusion journey. But we're both housing professionals. We worked for a good number of years, far too many to want to recall, in the housing association world at a senior level, with responsibility for customer engagement and equality, diversity and inclusion. And we've been involved in plenty of scrutiny events in the past, often being the subject of the scrutiny or the things that we were responsible for. So I think before we start, it's probably worth just doing a couple of housekeeping. So if we could ask people to stay on mute as far as possible, that would be great. Obviously, until we get into the workshops, which will be towards the end as a presentation first. And obviously, when we're going into the workshops, cameras on and unmuting is great for everybody. Feel free to use the chat function if you're comfortable with it, or as we were talking about, before the session actually started, using the hand up, anything like that. We're happy to pause and take questions at any time if people have them. And like I said, we're going to be using breakout rooms for the workshop towards the end. And when we come into that, we'll explain what we're going to do when we get there. So let's move on to that question then. So do great minds think alike? And is it desirable in the context of scrutiny? Well, certainly Thomas Paine, as you can see there, he was an English-born revolutionary who became one of the founding fathers of the USA. He didn't think the great minds think alike. And in 1792, in a political pamphlet, he said, "Great men don't think alike. And in fact, it is only those who have not thought that appear to agree." And whilst that's obviously a bit harsh, and it's not true to suggest that anyone who agrees hasn't had their own thoughts, because otherwise, obviously, how would anything like democracy ever work if that were the case? We don't need, however, to think about many great minds, either in the present or in the past, to know that not all great minds do think alike. And it would be a horrible state of affairs if they didn't it anyway. And the fact that we have this dissimilarity, that the uniqueness of human minds, that's the source of our progress. And without that, then, how far would we have actually come further on from invention of the wheel, for example? And if we think about the context of scrutiny, is thinking alike desirable? If everyone thinks the same, can we be confident that we've considered all of the angles of an issue, the whole of the subject of that scrutiny? Or have we possibly fallen into a trap of groupthink? So groupthink, again, might be something that people have heard of before, and it's a psychological phenomenon in which people strive for agreement or consensus within a group, so a meeting, a scrutiny group, whatever. And often people will set aside their own opinions or maybe be a bit reticent, a bit sit back to adopt the opinion of the rest of the group. And it comes from generally a good place, the desire not to upset the balance and, and to have that agreement. But of course, it can lead to poorer decisions, ones that have been less thought through, possibly considering different angles. And I can certainly think of lots of times, occasions when I've fallen into that trap before, where I perhaps haven't said something that I maybe wasn't quite sure about, or it didn't seem to be going with the flow of the rest of the meeting, but I haven't said anything because I didn't want to upset the apple cart. And the former chief exec of General Motors Alfred Sloan, had the following thoughts about people all being in agreement. So this is what he said, and I love this quote. He said, "Gentlemen," because no surprise, there were all men in the room at that time, "I take it we are all in complete agreement on the decision here." Everyone nodded, and he continued, "Then I propose that we postpone further discussion of this matter until the next meeting to give ourselves time to develop some disagreement and perhaps gain some understanding of what the decision is all about." And likewise, Jeff Bezos, so the founder of and CEO of Amazon, he doesn't like people all agreeing either. And actually, one of their things that they have on the company website actually says that one of their values is all about have backbone, disagree, and commit. Leaders are obliged to respectfully challenge decisions when they disagree, even when doing so is uncomfortable or exhausting. And of course, it's hard to argue, isn't it, with the success of those two people and those mega corporations that they represent. So how can we, within our scrutiny groups, make sure that we don't adopt that groupthink mentality and that we are having thorough discussions, that we are taking into account a range of views and making decisions that reflect those? Well, one of the key ways that we can stop groupthink happening is by embracing and valuing diversity. Because when people in groups do embrace diversity, they're better able to bring different perspectives, information, different ideas to the table, and that enhances decisions and makes it less likely that we'll fall into a pattern of groupthink. So what do we mean by diversity when I use that word? Well, diversity is all about difference, and it's about the difference that we all have. We are all unique. And of course, it's not just about visible difference either. The legislation, and the relevant legislation here, is the 2010 Equality Act, and that defines 9 protected characteristics, and you can see those on the screen there for age, sex, disability, ethnicity, gender reassignment, religion or belief, sexual orientation, marriage, civil partnerships, and pregnancy and maternity. And they're all aspects of a person's identity that makes them who they are. And as you can see from there, not all of those are visible differences at all. Sexual orientation, disability, religion, a lot of that is a hidden difference, if you like. And of course, everybody has at least a few of the 9 protected characteristics. We are all an age. We all have a sex. So, we all possess elements of protected characteristics. And it's very unlikely, almost impossible, I would suggest, for every scrutiny group to have voices around the table representing or from each of those protected characteristics. And of course, as well as all of that, we all have a huge amount of differences that aren't covered by those protected characteristics. We all have different thoughts, we have different experiences and different senses as well. And these are even less visible than the protected characteristics. And that difference of thought, experiences and senses is called diversity of thought or cognitive diversity. And researchers identified that despite our different upbringings or the different experiences that we've had along the way, how we all prefer or tend to think can be divided into 4 distinct groups. And this picture, as you can see here, this picture of, it's a pie chart, isn't it? That represents the brain divided into 4 segments. And this model was developed by somebody called Ned Herman, and it's called whole brain thinking model. And what he's found, or what he established, is that while everybody has all of those 4 sections within their brain, we all have a preferred way of thinking, quite often without realizing it. Now, to complete a full assessment of how we all think, there are hundreds of questions that you can answer, but it isn't necessary to do that full assessment to get an understanding of all of our individual thinking styles. And let me explain each of these 4 sections, so the yellow, the red, the green, and the blue. And whilst I'm doing so, I'd like you all to just have a think which represents your preferred thinking style. So we will have some yellows on the call today without a shadow of a doubt. And you're the intuitive people, you're the creative ones, you're open to new ideas. You've got to focus on the future. You like the whole big picture, the holistic. You like to see how things fit together. You're probably the person who's doodling at the meeting because your brain's sort of moved on from where the discussion is already. You might be thinking ahead of others. Or are you the red? The red are the people who make real feelings-based decisions. They're the collaborative people, the team-focused people. They connect to people. They're the ones who might say, oh, we can't start yet because where is so-and-so, so-and-so? Or, so-and-so, so-and-so isn't here, but I think they might say X, Y, Z. They respect where people are at and they like to put others at ease. So if they see somebody perhaps, looking slightly upset at a meeting, they're the ones who are going to notice that and are going to say, are you all right? They can be at risk of caring a bit too much, perhaps getting too emotionally involved for the scale of an issue. And the green, well, think about you're a green. If you're a green, well, then you're a practical. You're good at step-by-step processes. You're focused on getting things done in a timely way. You're likely to be the person who arrives on time to the meeting with everything that they need ready for that meeting. You're organized. You're interested in that clearly defined procedure, knowing how you're going to get from A to B. And like I say, having the tools that you need to get there. And the blue thinkers, well, you make real thoughts-based decisions. You're analytical, you're focused on the facts, you're logical. You'll have a tendency to seek a proof or a rationale behind any decision. So why is it we're thinking about that? Oh, well, that makes sense because we have these facts. You can maybe come across as a bit cold or uncaring, but you're not. It's just that for you, there's a time and a place for emotion, and it won't be within that scrutiny group. It's not in that work context. So let's just pause for a minute and all have a think about what we think our preferred thinking style is. Are we yellow? Are we red? Are we green? Or are we blue? Or do we see ourselves as a mix of both? Or a mix of both, a mix of a number of the different colors, if you like. So are people having a little thought there? Karen, have you had a thought? Do you know what you are? I'm blue and a bit green, Mark. Yes, that's lovely. I hope that doesn't mean you're feeling ill because
I think I'm probably different ones at different times, Lucy. Sometimes it can depend on what kind of day you've had, what kind of situation you're in, what it is, the subject that you're scrutinizing, how you feel about it, how much you know about it. So I think sometimes people can be a combination of the different types and be influenced by what's going on around you.
I think you're right. And it's great there. People are putting in the chat, people will be able to see it. Oh, somebody's had to leave for a COVID PCR test, blimey. So yes, red and as a backup, red. Yes, I think for some people it's really straightforward. They have a huge affinity with one of the colors more than others, and for others, like you say, like Karen's explaining there, it can be slightly dependent on the situation, but you will have a preference for how you behave on your thinking style.
And Rita's got a hand up, Lucy, so I don't know if Rita has
a question. I couldn't see that.
No, I'm struggling to see the chat, to be honest. So, but I can see Rita has a hand up, so she might have a question. Rita, you're on mute, so you might need to take your mute off. No, I'm sorry, Rita, you're still on mute. I'll see if I can unmute.
See if we can unmute Rita.
No, I can't.
Rita's off.
Oh, there you are. There you are.
She's back on mute.
Somebody put me back.
Oh, I'm sorry, Rita. You're back on mute. Lisa, are you able to? There you go. I think we might be able to hear you now.
Right. I just wanted to say that I'm a mixture of all of them, and I use different parts of all that brain pie chart for different things. And as Karen was saying, it depends very much on how much you are into something, whether the emotional side comes in, but I always try to keep the emotional side out of the scrutiny.
Brilliant. Thank you, Rita. Thank you for sharing that. Yes. Yeah. So we all, like I said before, we do all have each of those 4 elements. So it is possible that we can all adapt and change and thinking a style based on any of those colors. But why is it important to understand this? Why is it good for us to know? Well, because awareness of our preferred style and that of others really is a superpower. It helps with understanding the things that you may overlook when you're making decisions and solving problems. It helps you listen to the points of view of others, even when they are very different from yourself. And it gives you some insight into the way that others may behave and why they do what they do. And by have an understanding of others, then it can help you effectively prevent conflict. So some of the colors will have more potential for conflict and miscommunication than others. So there is a slight potential for antagonism between the blues and the reds, or the yellows and the greens, because the reds can perceive the blues perhaps to be sometimes too cold, and blues can see the reds to be over emotional and maybe too chatty. The yellows can sometimes think that the greens are a bit too conservative and too focused on getting, the decision sorted. And the green can think of the yellows as maybe too fluffy and a bit too late and prone to change their mind when they come across new ideas. So in the context of scrutiny, it's not just thinking about the diversity we all have as demonstrated by the protected characteristics. So, the experience that we might have being, a white female, such as myself, but equally, it's about that cognitive or that thinking style difference as well. So if this is important, if thinking about diversity is important as part of scrutiny, as a part of all of the groups that we have and in which we're involved, how do we do it? How do we have diversity within our groups? And really, there are 2 ways that we can actively embrace diversity. There's a recruitment and there's the reflection bit. So recruiting, as the word would suggest, that's about bringing people in who have that difference from you, that are different to your current group. So if you've got the opportunity to recruit, you can recruit for diversity, and we'll talk a bit about that in a minute. But of course, that isn't always an option. You might have the right amount of scrutineers as part of your group. The group might be very settled, and recruitment isn't an option, certainly at this point. So what you can do, and this is an or, if you like, it's certainly something worth considering, even if you are looking at recruitment as well, is about reflecting on diversity. And what we mean by that is making a conscious decision to think about the scrutiny that we're doing through the lens of diversity. So thinking about those who aren't like us and how they may be impacted by the decisions that we're making as part of that scrutiny. But of course, before you can even think about recruitment or reflection, you need to know your current position. Because how do you know what the difference is unless you know your current state? So you need to know what your group looks like now. So what's the diversity within our current scrutiny groups? Knowing that diversity, then you can think about any gaps that you may have, both in terms of protected characteristics and, of course, thinking styles. And it's knowing that, it's armed with that you can then make the decisions about recruiting or reflecting, or recruiting and reflecting diversity as well. So in terms of that, knowing the current state, so how do you do that? Well, we've created a tool which will be sent out at the end of this session that you can use. I'm gonna, well, actually you can see it here. Well, can people see piece of paper there? Piece of paper there, that's That's wonderfully scientific in there, isn't it? Showing it like that. But we've created a tool that you can use to measure the diversity of your group as it is now. So in effect, it's a monitoring form. So it covers the protected characteristics, but it also covers that thinking styles bit as well. So asking your current members anonymously, but to mark on a form, and then, you know, you can share that across the group, what your preferred thinking style is with choices 1 and 2. And then collecting that information, like I say, in relation to the protected characteristics. So, you know, the gender identity, the sexual orientation, the religion or belief of all of the members of the group. Because when you've got all of that, you can then review the results. So like I say, that can be completed anonymously, but with that full picture, you'll then be able to see where you've got any gaps. You could also, of course, do a comparative exercise, particularly if you're looking to recruit, with information that your housing organisation will have of the diversity, either of the whole of the tenant population or even the local demographic information for your area, your geographical area. And having established what those gaps may be, the question you need to ask yourself then is, how are you going to fill these? Will you be recruiting? Will you be taking an active reflection type approach, or will you do both? So if you're going to look to recruit for diversity, well, obviously the key things you're going to be thinking about is the advertising and being very clear about the description of the role within your scrutiny group. So advertising, where are you going to advertise that might attract groups of people, you know, that you've identified gaps within your group from? So you need to think about that. So where might be, you know, the local venues where you might be able to attract, you know, if you recognize that perhaps, you know, there's a shortage of people, females or people from different ethnic minority groups, you might want to particularly go to venues or events, you know, where groups that you're trying to attract would you know, be there anyway. Of course, within your advert, you can expressly state your desire to attract people from certain groups or with different thinking styles as well. So, and that is called positive action, and that's a perfectly legitimate thing to do. And thinking about the description of the role, it's important that you use language, of course, that is inclusive. As a minimum, that should be gender neutral, and you should avoid language and adjectives that can be seen as too masculine as well, particularly if you're looking to attract females. And I'm going to come on to the question from John just in 2 seconds, but in the description, you can set out your stall about what you would want from a new recruit. So for example, somebody who embraces diversity, who can challenge themselves to think differently at different times. So on that, I'm just going to pause and I'm going to come to John, who's got his hand up. John. Oh, John, you're on mute. If you could just unmute yourself first, please.
There.
Hi.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
The housing association that we represent is a very, very diverse locations all over the country. So it's very difficult to pinpoint any diverse group within that. So have you got any advice on how to recruit on a broader basis?
Well, you know, I think the same principles apply whether you're looking to be really specific in terms of recruitment. Say, you know, you recognize that you have a shortage of female and you want to attract females to your group, or somebody from a different ethnic background. But it's the same principles whether you want that more generic recruitment as well, you know, that you just want to attract a broad range of people. It is about making that advert as inclusive as you possibly can. You know, so using language that doesn't put people off. So use language that's very generic, that does, you know, that isn't gender specific. And really make, I suppose the key with any advert for anything, whether this is an advert on television, you know, for a a tin of beans or an advert for a job. It's about making it sound attractive, isn't it? So it's making it seem something that people would want to do. So it's that excitement bit that you need to get right within the advert as well.
Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Mary, you've got your hand up there.
Hi, I just wanted to ask you, we have a lot of properties in the south of England, and we also have a lot of properties in the north of England. And what we're finding is that we're not getting a representation from the north as much as the south. So it's like, what do? Because it was started in it's all the different mergers that have happened. And just wondering, do you have some advice about how to get some more people involved in it?
That's a really good question, and I think that's something, that you're not the only housing associate, organisation that'll be struggling with that, because you're right. Quite often, particularly following mergers, groups can be seen as solely for the original housing organisation, if you like, rather than being for the others who subsequently join. So again, it's some of the same things in terms of John. You're going to have to be, I think, probably really specific when you're looking at your recruitment. So your messaging, so if you're particularly wanting to attract people in the north, then you need to get your messaging right. So where are you putting it out there? Maybe it's about being very direct in terms of saying, we're really wanting representation of people from the north for this group, ensure your voices are heard and listened to, come along, make it sound attractive. And I suppose, it's about who's already up there in the north. So, the staff within your organisation who are going to be the best advocates to use to be that voice in the north for you to go out and do some of that door knocking, hand holding, encouragement in that area. But I think that is quite a common problem. And I think that can happen as well, where groups are seen as for a certain group of people. It probably comes back to one of John's points. It can be hard, and the age-old problem is often in terms of age, isn't it? So a group being seen as, well, actually, because everybody I can see on there at the moment is of an older age group, then therefore this isn't something for somebody who's younger. So how do you square that circle? So it is having to be very direct about that, and actually doing that shout out to want that representation of younger people, and encouraging that to be in any way that you can, not always having to be sitting around the table. And I think, the benefit that we've got now of the Zoom interactions, it does make things more accessible for people as well. So use that to your best advantage in terms of attracting people. Yeah? Does that help?
Yeah, that's really helpful.
Okay, great. Okay. And of course, if you are then carrying out an interview, that sort of final stage, making sure that interview is aligned to the advert, the job description, and does really show the person who might be interested in joining you that you are an inclusive group, is equally very important. Karen and I were at an event a few weeks ago where somebody who'd been involved in a recruitment for scrutiny was sharing a story with us. And they said they'd been had a number of people that they'd interviewed on this day, and there was one person that was a standout candidate. They were definitely, the right person in terms of the questions, that scored highest. Anyway, the person who was sharing the story with us then popped out of the meeting room where the interviews had been held, popped to go and get a coffee or something, and came back in. And by the time they got back in the room, everybody else had decided that actually the person who, before she'd gone out of the room, everybody was saying, this is a person, we definitely want to offer the role to, had changed their mind. And they'd changed their mind because they'd realized that actually the person who had performed best in the interview had a disability that meant that they would have had to have made some adjustments as part of their meeting. They would have had to think about things in a slightly different way. And when the person came back into into that group discussion about who was going to be the person they wanted to offer the role to, people had changed their mind. Now, they had a further discussion, and you know, it went well in the end, and the person who they would have to make changes for was the person who they subsequently brought into the group, and they were phenomenally successful, and it went really well. But it was just an interesting story to think about, you know, to keep your minds open when you are doing recruitment, and that actually what might seem as a great stumbling block or having to think about doing things different, again, is another way of valuing diversity and respecting that difference and the value that it can bring. So if we don't have the option for recruiting, or even if we do want to recruit, how else can we think about diversity within our group? How do we build it into our structures? So reflecting on diversity is something that you can definitely do within all of your scrutiny groups. And there are a few ways that you can do this. Like I say, you can think about considering diversity as part of your structures. So as an agenda item, as something that you think about within each of your scrutiny subjects. So when you are setting out at the start of that scrutiny process, it might be that you as part of that, you set up to have that reflection on diversity as part of that process at the beginning, and equally before that final decision is made as well. And another thing that we're going to send out to you at the end of this session is another tool that we've created, which is sort of a ready reminder tool. It's a diversity reflection tool, and it's a couple of sheets of A4 in effect that just make you think about different learning styles and different protected characteristics. So before you're making those final decisions, as a group, you can reflect on what the impact of that decision may be on people with different protected characteristics, with different learning styles. So, you know, on here, and I'm going to hold something up again, so that we've put on here the sorts of considerations you might want to think about. So, you know, when we're thinking about disability, for example, you know, have we thought as part of what it is that we're completing this scrutiny on, you know, have we thought about different disabilities, the different impacts they could have, the accessibility, have we thought about communication, have we thought about facilities, if that's relevant? So there's a ready reminder, if you like, tool here that'll just help you to have those thoughts, put that diversity at the heart of what you're doing in your scrutiny groups. And I think we've got John with his hand up again. John, have you got another question?
You're on.
Yes. About recruitment, would you say it's the panel's job to interview and recruit, or do you think that staff members from the association should be involved?
My view would be that it would be great for the panel to be involved. You know, why wouldn't that be a joint exercise? But, you know, I think for the person who's looking to join the group, it gives them a really good feel of what that group's all about. If you've got people from the group as part of that interview process, and likewise, you know, particularly if you are looking to bring on people who are different from you, either in terms of protected characteristics or thinking styles, then, you know, that gives you that opportunity to see that as well.
We're in the process of recruiting now, and the head of customer involvement for Stonewater has decided that it's just going to be her and the chair of the group that will do the interviews, which I think is totally wrong. We haven't seen the advertisement yet, but I suppose it's supposed to be going out today. But I just believe that, like you said, it should be the group and not just two people. Thank you.
Yeah, I think, you know, because you are bringing somebody into a group, that group dynamic is really important, isn't it?
Yes.
You know, so that you are encouraging that diversity. So, you know, I think it would be great to be able to be involved in that process, and it may be that there could be two stages to that process. Just seeing in the chat there, somebody saying, if you have the whole group, it could be overwhelming. Absolutely. It could be a two-stage process. It could be an informal get together with the whole group, you know, maybe an interview with a few members, but then, you know, coffee or getting to know you with the group. There's certainly ways that I think you can get the best of both worlds, definitely.
Okay, thank you very much.
Rita, I can see you've got your hand up. And then we'll come on to Darren.
Thank you. Thank you. When we do interviews after recruitment or prior to asking someone to join the group, it's 3 members of the scrutiny panel, and our facilitator just fixes that up and makes the appointments for the interviews. That's worked very well. We obviously do scorecards for how people have done, but I found this quite interesting on reflecting on the diversity of the person, because quite honestly, we've found in some cases it's like, oh, we can't do that and we can't do that because, as you said, people thought that it would be too much to alter the structure of the group or the way you met because of someone else's infirmity, and we've got to remember not to do that. I found that very interesting. As I say, how we've done the interviews has worked well because it is 3 tenant panel members.
Yeah.
But that really made me think actually about some of the discussions that go on around about the candidate.
Yeah. Well, hopefully, Rita, you'll find this reflection tool, like I say, it's 3 pages of A4, but there's just some little reminders, some little thoughts on there, some things to think about, because nobody's an expert on all of the subject areas. So just having that little reminder, I think, will hopefully you'll find really useful. Yeah. Interestingly, before I come on to Darren, I was just seeing there in the chat, somebody saying how they had some panel members, so I presume it was scrutiny panel members, involved in the interview in which they were successfully recruited through, and they found that really useful and a really great way of doing it. So that was useful. Thank you very much. So Darren, can we come to you, please?
Yes. What we do.
Oh, Darren, is it me or have you just frozen?
I think we've lost Darren a little.
Yeah, it's frozen on my screen.
Yeah.
Darren, are you there? Oh, well, I tell you what, when Darren comes back, hopefully we'll come straight on to his point there. Yeah. So that would be great. So, I thought he was just coming back there. No, that was just a flickering of the screen. Okay. So reflection on diversity, we think, is a really useful way of having those thoughts about difference, how what you're thinking about might be impacted on different people, might impact on different people, but equally thinking about, your group and making sure that you're thinking about different thinking styles, how others may perceive, how others may feel about what it is that you're carrying the scrutiny on. Is a really useful way of doing it. Okay, so Darren, we still lost Darren, but let's have so in terms of a quick recap, I suppose, of where we've got to so far. So what we said is that great minds do very rarely think alike, and it would be a shame if everybody did think alike anyway, because diversity is something that we should value and that we should embrace as part of our groups. And we can either recruit for or reflect on diversity to make sure that we have those robust decisions as part of our scrutiny process. If we're going to go down the recruitment route, well, we need to really think about our advertising, our job descriptions, and I suppose, to take Mary's point, particularly where we've got that north-south divide, is about, I suppose, as well, employing or using the people from different areas to help us with that. So it requires some thought and, putting into that process. If we're going to go down the reflecting on diversity route, because recruitment isn't an option at the moment, or we have recruited, but still we want to go down that reflecting route, well, that means that we need to give active consideration to the thoughts of others, so the thoughts of people who aren't represented as part of our group. And it does require us to maybe think about our processes, whether that's in terms of agenda items, whether that's in terms of using something like the Ready Reckoner tool that will provide you all with, as we're making our decisions. But before, of course, we do that recruitment or reflecting, it's important that we know the current state. So what do we look like now? As a group, how are we made up? How diverse are we? And again, the tool that we're going to provide you with at the end of this will help you to do that for your group, and do that anonymously, but it gives you that position. So that's sort of having looked at the diversity element. And what I want to do is open it up for any questions now before we move on to think about the inclusion bit. So have we got any more questions? Have we got Darren back?
Yeah.
Oh, brilliant. Come in, Darren.
My internet was playing up. Yeah, so what we do, to scrutiny from different areas for Archon and Bolton at Home, we're merging together. And last week, the Ops Committee were having interviewing people for the Ops Committee to be on board on that. And I suggested that if they're not suitable for that role, for that board, pass them on to us, and we'll have a think and talk about the scrutiny about recruiting as well. Mm-hmm. And plus, make it clear and advertise it on the web page, on the Housing Association page, and don't put too much jargon in it, because it'll just bore people.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, you are so right with jargon, isn't it?
Yeah, that's such a good point, Darren, in terms of the language and the jargon. It can be really, a little bit off-putting, a little bit intimidating. In fact, that people think, oh no, this isn't for me, because some of that language is so exclusive rather than inclusive. So I think you've made an excellent point there in terms of the language and the jargon. Yes,
it's so true, isn't it? That we have a tendency, and I think, it's a bit groupthink, really, isn't it? When you've worked in housing, or you've been part of, a scrutiny group or an actively involved tenants group, and have been involved in housing for so long, you get used to even words like voids. So people outside of housing, why don't we just say empty properties, but we say voids, so that there is, you're absolutely right, Darren, language is so important that you get it right. I'm just seeing there that Tracy's sharing that their scrutiny group's independent, set their own interview questions, do their own interviews. That's wonderful. That's absolutely brilliant. What about any other questions? Has anybody got any other questions before we move on to think about inclusion?
Could I just say something?
Yes, of course.
Yeah. It was, I think somebody, we tweeted something. I'm from Warrington Housing Association, and our excellent communications company we use, Yellow Jigsaw, did a tweet. Obviously, we're all doing it for this week, but and on a thing, sort of a standard advertisement that we use to try and get scrutiny members, she'd put in the narrative, do you want to be an influencer? And I thought that was really good, and I think one of the TPAS colleagues said, oh, we'll use that, because I thought, when you're thinking about the work scrutiny does, and this this role now people take as influencers on social media, but I just thought it might be something that other people might want to use, when it's another way of sort of making people understand the role without, again, the jargon, isn't it? Because it is a very influential role, isn't it? And
it's a really important role as well. I think that's wonderful. I love that. And I think that going back to that point that we made, particularly in relation to age, I think influencer is particularly something, that language is probably more in tune with a younger age group. So I think that's wonderful to use words like influencer, where people could think, oh yeah, I absolutely want to be an influencer.
And we're just hoping to start setting up a younger people's panel, and it maybe start thinking about that as well, and that's the sort of way to gauge that. But I think for any age, it sort of speaks volumes, doesn't it?
It does. I mean, interesting when you're thinking about setting up a younger person's panel, and talking about influencers, will you be putting an advert out via something like TikTok? Because then thinking about the mediums that you're using are really important. Because yes, as housing organizations, vast majority have fantastic websites, but who's using your website? And you can ask internally, your communications department within the housing organization will have from all of the algorithms that you can get from hosting a website, you'll know who's looking at your website, and you'll know who isn't. And you'll be able to see that age profile, to a degree. I mean, it's not 100% scientific, but that's, that really tells you as well about where the best places are to be thinking about advertising. Definitely.
I think you're right. And I think on previous TPAS training I've been on, and we've talked about that, because like you say, sort of people that use Facebook, but like obviously TikTok is a big thing. I know internally we've been discussing whether we should. I'm not doing all the dances.
I know it's a bit scary, isn't it? I think, but yes, but that's going with the flow, isn't it? So it is recognizing that the world is moving on, and interestingly, where Karen and I used to work, we did a lot of analysis of the communication that was coming in through different mediums, and Facebook. I think some people in the organization had said, that's the modern way. But actually, Facebook was really attracting predominantly female, 35 to 45 age group, wasn't it, Karen? And we, from all of that analytics, we had a really clear picture of who was communicating with us in that way, who was looking at the website, and then you can really tailor your messages using the right medium to attract the right audience. It's what the big things do all the time, isn't it? Which is why we get all of the pictures. For me, it was sofas that I was looking at yesterday coming up on my news feed today. So use that communication, definitely.
I think we've got a question from Shafiq next.
Oh, Shafiq, hi.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. My question is, I live in the LH area in Merseyside, and we all find difficulty recruiting BAME group. We explain what scrutiny is. We send out adverts to mostly everybody's interested via Facebook, via WhatsApp, but we're still not getting people from that marginal groups, if you want to call them that. But my biggest question is, how do you advertise without insulting anyone in any group? Because you find if you're going to create an advert saying that more initially that you want more females or more males or more black people, certain groups get quite offended. So you're trying to keep it generalized, but how do you keep something generalized at the same time to focus certain groups that I want to attract?
That's a really, really great question. Thank you so much. And I think there are a couple of ways you can do it, because you're right. You can end up thinking, we'll just make it inclusive for everybody, but then you're not necessarily attracting the people who you particularly want to attract. But what you can do, I suppose, is you can have that more generic, more general advert, but then tailor that slightly. So, if you are going out so you're particularly wanting to attract somebody, I don't know, from say Bangladeshi community, just as an example, then what about the local meeting places? What other connections do you have? And making the advert or the approach that you take there, making that tailored specifically for that group, but then taking the same generic advert and I suppose tailoring it for that younger person's group, where you may be using that example of referring to wanting to be an influencer and doing something on TikTok. So I think you can and you should tailor your messages, for those specific groups. And I think, or even create one that, I think tailoring your messages has to be the way forward, really.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
So we've got a question here from Caritas. Hand up there, I think.
Yes, that's my hand up. Hi, I also wonder as well whether we shouldn't be too precious about how scrutiny is delivered, and that sometimes the traditional group method of scrutiny can put an awful lot of people off. Because I remember seeing things that saying sort of joining formal groups is actually one of the least preferred options for people volunteering. So maybe, you know, there are different options like task and finish, or, you know, ways where you can do sort of encourage people to do scrutiny at a very condensed level that will get a much more diverse group of people involved, because not everybody wants to be in a group that meets every month or every 2 weeks, say.
I think that's a really fantastic point. And I think there'll probably be people on the call today who do adopt that sort of approach. And I think how you have to think about that is probably about the different subjects of the scrutiny, because some of them will be more appropriate for adopting that sort of, you know, task and finish type small working groups. And by working groups, I don't mean necessarily a smaller group of people going and sitting together with either virtually or physically together in the same room. So I think thinking about what it is as the subject of your scrutiny is critical there, because that will help you shape what's the best way of doing it. But 100% right, you know, and we all know it to be true, don't we, that going into a meeting room with a load of people who know each other already is incredibly daunting. So, and I think Zoom can help with some of that. It's less daunting when you're in the comfort of your own home, sitting at your own kitchen table, in your own sitting room or whatever, can make that a bit easier. So I think that's a great step forward, I suppose, a silver lining from everything that we've all been through for the past 18 months. But yes, definitely different ways of doing scrutiny definitely add to that diversity without a shadow of a doubt. Now, I'm conscious of the time. We've got some hands up still.
Yes, we've got 3 hands up, Lucy, but I was going to say I was going to crack the whip in terms of time. So perhaps, I think we've got Mary, John and Rita all with their hands up. So perhaps if we could ask them, perhaps Kate as well has put up a hand. So perhaps if we could ask them to hold their questions, and if we've got time at the end, do you think that's a good idea? Do you think that would be okay? Because I don't want to take any time away from the workshop element. Yeah, I think that's a really good idea. Is that okay with everybody? General thumbs up, nods. Brilliant. Right. Okay, we'll crack on. So what I just want to share with you before we move into the workshops is a case study. So getting our diversity considerations right, we've said, are critical for better decision making. But diversity won't stack up unless you get that inclusion part right as well. And what we mean by that is creating the environment in our groups where diversity can thrive, where everyone feels that their voices can be heard, that they're not an outsider or just brought in because of the color of their skin, their gender identity or whatever, but that actually their voices are valued and are being listened to. So let me share with you a story. This is a true story to illustrate how important this is. So there was a large housing association and it was setting up a new scrutiny group. And they did actually actively recruit to reflect protected characteristics and diversity. And they even completed, and this is a number of years ago, but they even completed a thinking-based analysis to get a mixture of thinking styles, cognitive diversity. Great, you would think, brilliant. You know, they've done everything right. They've ticked all of the boxes, and you would thought that that would be job done. But not long after the group had been set up, people started to leave. And those who were still left within that scrutiny group couldn't really understand what was going on. And they came to the conclusion, you know, as we all perhaps would have done, that the people who'd gone just weren't right for the role in scrutiny. Anyway, roll forward slightly, and a while later, one of the groups bumped into somebody who had left the scrutiny group just whilst they were out in the shops one day. And they said to them, why did you leave? What was it about, you know, the scrutiny group that made you leave? And they said, that person explained that they felt left out. They were quite quiet person generally, and that they felt that nobody took the time
to include them, to actively include them as part of that group. They felt that they had things to say, but they didn't feel that sense of belonging, that inclusion as part of the group. And so they decided to leave. So that scrutiny group, whereas it has got its diversity right, so it had got that mix of people, it had got the different thinking styles. What it hadn't done was created the environment, the inclusion bit that's so important with diversity, to make the people feel that they belonged and that they could give their all as part of that group. So we're going to move you into the workshops now. And what we're going to ask you to do is think about inclusion. But I'm going to hand over to Karen, who's going to explain it all.
Let me just take myself off mute there. Thank you, Lucy. So Lisa is very kindly going to set us up into the different workshops. Should be between 6 to 8 participants in each room, please, Lisa. And what we'd like you all to discuss and think about together is, having heard and discussed what we've done so far in the session, what individual actions do you think we could each take to create that inclusive environment? So thinking about the case study that Lucy's just shared there, what would we do in our own scrutiny groups to make sure that all those people, all those new members perhaps who were joining us for all the right reasons, what could we do to create that environment where everybody's voice could be heard? So bearing in mind the time that we have, welcome back everyone. We can see that people are starting to come out of the breakout rooms now. So just a gentle reminder as you're coming out of the breakout room, if you can pop yourself back onto mute, that would be really useful, and then we don't get any interference or background noise.
Are we all there, Karen, do we think?
I'm just scrolling through, Lucy.
Yeah, everybody's back now. They've all closed.
Oh,
yeah,
wonderful.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much, Lisa. So thanks for doing that, everybody. We hope that you you enjoyed that very specific 12-minute opportunity to discuss that in your groups and to learn from each other and share your own experiences and your own thoughts about the positive action that you could take to create that inclusive environment. So we're going to take 5 minutes or so, just mindful of the time, but we'll take a little bit of feedback. And very scientifically, I'm going to pick a number because we've got 9 breakout rooms. So I'm going to pick a number first of all. So room number 1, is there anybody from room number 1 that would like to volunteer just to very quickly share a little bit of the discussion and give some feedback on the discussion in your room? So themselves off mute.
I need to go from room 1, that's okay.
That's brilliant, thank you.
Oh, thanks. We had a discussion on how we can involve people, and one of the things we spoke about was, throwing people in at the deep end. So what we do, we actually have inductions for people. So when they know they come along and they find out a bit about the company, have informal coffee and chats with members, just break them in gently, maybe have a buddy as well, just to make sure everybody's included. And when we do have meetings, make sure everybody has the same opportunity to speak by going around the room and not, pointing the finger at anybody, making them feel uncomfortable, just saying, if you've got anything to add, this is your opportunity to do it, and put like a time limit on it so nobody takes over. So we have a good chat about the different tools and techniques we can use to involve people.
That's brilliant, Claire. Thank you very much. I think an induction it's a great idea, isn't it? Just to have something formal or structured rather than formal, I guess, where, people feel like they're getting the fluency and the understanding of what the role is all about, what the organization's all about. And it's just going to, give somebody a bit of confidence. But I do think as well that creating time for people who wouldn't naturally be the first person to come forward and give their view, or then, you know, actually structuring the meeting to allow those opportunities to happen, I think is a really positive step as well. So thank you very much for sharing that. I'm going to pick our next room at random, and that's number 5. So is there anybody from room number 5 who would like to share some feedback for us? So Liz, I think you've got your hand up there.
Hello.
Hi, that's lovely, Liz. Thank you. Were you in room number 5? Would you like to
I
give
was.
us?
I don't know whether anyone else wanted to say anything, but we focused on the group amongst the group. I'm new to scrutiny, so I kind of learnt a lot over the last 12 months. The things that cropped up, Dave mentioned, avoid the S word. It can put a lot of people off. So scrutiny.
We're taking you mean scrutiny with. You do mean scrutiny, not something else, don't you? With the S word.
I do,
there.
yeah.
The other S word should definitely be avoided. Yes.
Yes. He mentioned about provoking interest, using phrases like "have you say." Sounds so much better to a lot of people. We thought the communication with each other within the panel is really paramount. It's something we've had issues with, I think, our group, and we're hoping going forwards to have more informal meetings with each other between the formal ones, whereby they're very prescriptive and for an hour long, and you're talking about what's on the agenda rather than to each other. So maybe going forward, having, you know, coffee morning or something online, as it were, and getting to know each other as people, I think is really important, so that you trust each other and you're comfortable enough to say what you think in front of others and not be intimidated. Yeah, I don't know whether anyone else in my group's got anything to add.
I think you said it, Liz.
That's lovely, Liz. Thank you. I think that idea of having the coffee morning as an alternative to the formal meeting is a lovely way of creating that safe space where people do feel like they've got the kinds of relationships where they can be open and honest with each other, challenge each other in a supportive way, and investing that time in getting to know each other and getting those relationships right is a really positive step. So I think that's a great idea, Liz. Thank you very much for sharing that. Have we got time for one more, Lucy?
Oh yes, definitely.
Yeah? Room number 3. Anybody from room number 3 who would like to share their feedback? No takers for room number 3?
Pick another room, Karen.
Pick another room. Pick another room. Right, okay. Room number 4. Anybody from room number 4?
Yeah. Is that okay?
That's lovely. Thank you, Sandy.
Thank you, Sandy.
That's okay. Absolutely love that idea from Liz about the coffee morning. That's absolutely brilliant. We talked a lot about the digital side of it and how much it's actually helped in many ways, but being doubly aware of the people who can't access, always to bring that in, to listen to them, because they're the ones at the moment who are being slightly sidelined, you know, to say it. And when you're in a meeting, or whether it's online or face to face, it's always, in a way, making sure you're doubly aware of people who are quiet, who do sit back a little bit. It's learning to read that body language a little bit, because those people are actually so invaluable to meetings, because they went out of their way to get there. So they had something and they turned up. They might not have added it, but they might have something they want to say. So even if it is, as they've said, leave it till after the meeting if they don't come in and join, but you try and include them. That's fine, as long as you don't try too hard, because some people don't like that either. But then leaving those options open of contact after. So that was about it.
Sandy, I love that whole body language point. I think, you know, just having an eye on that, regardless of whether it is virtual or face to face, you know, just take a check around the room. How are people looking? Do they look comfortable? Do they look like they've got something they want to say, but they're not quite at the point where they're ready to say it? And, you know, investing in that time to just check how people are feeling, presenting. I think that's really, really important. And if somebody does look like they're not quite leaning in, they're not quite, you know, in the room, then that there are ways that we can give people that space to say what they want to say. As you've said, they've taken the time to turn up, so they've got something to add, and it's a valuable contribution to make. So, you know, there are ways to accommodate that and make sure we're not missing a trick in terms of the contribution that those people can make. Lucy, have we got time for one more, do you think?
Or quickly, one more, go on.
Quickly, one more. Room number 6. Anybody from room number 6 got a very quick one-liner that they'd like to share? Because we're getting some great stuff here.
It's Jo. Hello.
Hi.
Oh, hi, Jo. I'm quickly going to run through very quickly for you what we talked about.
Thank you.
It was understanding that participants are individuals and treat them as such.
Mm.
We thought about having team building events that take you away from the business and doing the doing, so we can look about learning styles, how people see each other and work together. Looking at having one-to-ones in an informal setting over coffee, mentoring, peer mentoring, buddy systems, so that people are working together. Having a facilitator that ensures everyone is asked their views, but not to dwell on them if they don't want to participate. Ask that individual how they want to feel like they would be involved more and listened to. So actually ask them how they would see that happening, but always giving people the opportunity to feedback after this session as well.
Great. God, Jo, that's fantastic. Thank you so much. You've given a whistle-stop tour there of, you know, some great suggestions. I love the idea of a buddy. I think, you know, sometimes just somebody that you know is there to support you in a new situation. For some people is just the little extra that they might need. So a good buddy and a good facilitator can make a massive difference. So thank you very much to Claire and Liz and Sandy and Jo for sharing all of the feedback there. Lucy, shall we move on to?
Yes, I mean, I think, you know, what I would say from all of that, from all of those conversations that have been going on, and thank you so much for obviously engaging everybody so brilliantly, is what you really understand from that is that inclusion is an action. It is a conscious decision. You have to do things to make people included. You know, just having an open meeting, if you like, isn't including everybody. So everything you've talked about there are active things to do, whether it is those conversations, the buddying, whether it is the coffee mornings, whether it is that checking in, whether it's actively looking at people's body language around the room. It's all conscious decision making to make people feel included. You've got to do something to create that inclusive environment, which is a wonderful segue, as you would expect, to the last slide that I've got, which, you know, is just, I suppose, in summary of what we've covered today. So diversity, as we've said, or we've had that one, Karen. There we are. Yes. So diversity, as we've said, is a fact. It's the difference that we all have. We're all unique, and diversity is everywhere. It is a fact, but inclusion is an action. It is a conscious decision to make everyone feel welcomed. It's about creating that right environment, either within the meeting or through all of the methods that you've talked about in advance of and after the meeting. It really is an active pursuit to make everybody feel involved. And when you've got that diversity and inclusion in place, then the outcome is more robust scrutiny without a shadow of a doubt. So diversity and inclusion, a really important element of scrutiny. And that is where we would like to end. So We are absolutely bob on time. So can we just say from Karen and I, thank you so much, everybody, for all of your participation and your feedback and the messages in the chat. And I'm sorry if they've got any questions that we haven't been able to answer, but we will send out, like I say, these 2 tools for you. So the sort of the reflection tool and the monitoring tool as well. And hopefully you'll find those of use. So thank you very much and have a lovely rest of the afternoon, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Really enjoyed it.